Time to play Stump the Former Senator. Jim Talent was the senator from Missouri and a member of the House as well. Good morning, Senator. How are you?
I'm fine. What do I get if I win?
I'll send you my copy of Alex Ward's new book, The Internationalist, because it's so bad. I mean, the book is great, but the Biden administration is so bad and it's so accurately chronicled. Here's the question. Whose national security policy was worse, Jimmy Carter's or Joe Biden's?
I think Biden's, although it's been a while since I've studied Carter. Let me put it this way. It's hard to imagine one that's worse than the one we've had now. And all you have to do is look at the results. You know, I know you've been talking about Ukraine, for example, and in the book you mentioned, which I need to get and read, it records that Biden ticked off or said some mean things to Putin in his summit. But that was after waiving the Nord Stream sanctions. It was after giving him a rollover of the New START treaty with no conditions. And it was after giving him the summit on no conditions. So actions speak louder than words. And that's a big part of the problem here. We're seeing it in the Middle East. We're seeing it in Eastern Europe. And we're seeing it in Indo-PACOM.
A long time ago, Jim, when you and I were young, I worked for Richard Nixon. He was writing a book called The Real War, and one chapter was on summitry, and his admonition to future presidents was never go to the summit unless you know what's on the other side. When Biden went to Geneva in 2021, the new book by Alex Ward says he looked at Putin and said, "I've looked in your eyes and you have no soul." That sounds a little Clint Eastwoodish to me. I don't believe it. But he did walk away with nothing, and Putin walked away thinking, this guy is not going to stop me. Exactly the opposite of Gorbachev and Reagan at Reykjavik, correct?
Yeah, it goes back to Teddy Roosevelt. You walk softly, but you carry a big stick. Well, what we've done is we've talked big while allowing the stick to atrophy, and we've discussed this. I mean, look at the issues we're having in the Red Sea and with the Houthis, which is at least in part because the Navy's too small. So, you know, if you're strong and you have a consistent policy backed up by actions, you don't need to go in and act like Clint Eastwood. And you probably shouldn't. I doubt Richard Nixon ever did. You'd know more about that than I would.
I do think there's an argument with the Houthis because they are affecting the price of every good for every country in the world. They're hurting poor people. Is an international occupation by a UN force. Now, I don't know that Russia wouldn't veto it or China wouldn't veto it. But I still think Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and the United States and the UK has got to do something. They can't let the Red Sea be held hostage by a group of turn of the last millennium bandits, can they?
No, I mean, I'd try some other things first. I mean, Admiral Stav talked about some good possible reprisals yesterday. I'd add to that taking out some Iranian Revolutionary Guard leaders, which, by the way, the Israelis have done quietly. Since last fall, I think they've taken out 16 or 17 IRG leaders. And remember when Trump took out Qasem Soleimani of the Quds Force?
Yes.
I tell you, they sent a message throughout the Middle East. So let's
The
try
other
some other
thing,
things first.
the other thing that he's mentioned, Alex, is that North Korea did not test missiles when Trump was president. They're back doing it now. To what do you attribute that change in behavior by the dictator Kim Jong-un?
Well, it's in part that that's just their policy. In other words, they figured out, as other rogue regimes have figured out, that if you have nuclear weapons, it empowers you in the world stage because it limits the options of the United States, even under a good leader. So part of it is their policy, and part of it is the incoherence and weakness of our policy, really all throughout Indo-PACOM. We actually, and I always add this because I try and be fair, we have done a pretty good job of firming up alliances like with the Aussies, with the Japanese, et cetera. But what is missing is the component of power. I mean, you were talking yesterday about stationing some of our littoral combat vessels as tripwires. I think that'd be a pretty good idea. But I'd much more, rather double the shipbuilding budget. In other words, send the message to Xi Jinping that because he's doing what he's doing, we're going to engage in a Reagan era-like buildup of America's armed forces. Now, that would be a deterrent. There's a level.
I agree. Let's focus on the littoral combat ship for a moment, the LCS. Why is it such a bust, Jim? Is it because it can't do anything well? It tried to do too much?
Well, I think there's two reasons. The first is that the decision to build it was made during the global war on terror. and it's called a littoral combat vessel. So the idea was that the Navy needed a capability to come in close to shore, mine sweep, support ground forces in anti-terror and counterterrorism actions. And the second reason is it's a modular platform. You're supposed to be able to pull out different capabilities and plug in others. And I don't think the Navy ever got that right. So, I mean, and then the other problem, Hugh, is that we're not spending enough to build all the capabilities we need. If we'd been building 40 or 50 frigates at the same time that could operate in the high seas, well, the fact that you have the littoral combat, it would just be a capability that we're not using very much now. But
Yeah, and then I got criticized yesterday by a friend saying, you're suggesting that the LCS be bait. No, I think it ought to be a tripwire, right? Just we got our ships in harbor, don't land here.